Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp and Maxance Vincent to discuss The Watchers, Ishana Night Shyamalan's directorial debut. The Watchers, or The Watched if you're in the UK or Ireland, follows a young American woman named Mina who is working in Ireland. She's driving through the countryside. She reaches this mysterious forest, and all of a sudden, all of her electronics, including her car, stops. She finds herself lost in the forest. She has no idea what's happening when all of a sudden she meets a mysterious group of people who take her to this bunker, and they say every single night they have to be in this bunker. They have to be here, and one of the walls of the bunker is a one-way mirror, so everything outside the bunker can see in. They don't know exactly what's happening outside the bunker, but they know that there are these mysterious creatures that they call the Watchers who come and watch them every single night. And if you're not in the bunker in time for them to get there, they will hunt you down and kill you. No one really knows exactly what they are. No one knows exactly what they want. It is just an effort to survive, and Mina finds herself right in the middle of this struggle. Look, as Shyamalan stands, of course we were going to give his daughter the time of day here on the podcast, but unfortunately it's quite a mixed effort she delivered. Join us as we discuss the film as a directorial debut. We talk about what we like about the film, what we dislike about the film from a directing standpoint, and in great detail in a completely spoiler-filled section, we get into the exact details of the baffling third act within the film that I think universally we were all very confused by, we were not big fans of, and we truly think the film just loses the plot. But we do think there's some rewarding things here to talk about, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Thank you so much for listening and watching the podcast. We love you, and we are so excited to get into our review of The Watchers.
Where's the car?
You have 5 seconds before the door is sealed. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Okay, and to start with our spoiler-free thoughts on the film, I want to start positive. Max, you convinced us last episode you were on with Westball. You convinced us, you turned us onto your side. I'm, not to spoil anything, think you're going to be doing another uphill battle today, but let's start positive. What are your thoughts on The Watchers, or if you're elsewhere, The Watched?
Is it really called The Watch internationally?
Yep.
Yes.
I don't know why.
Is there a reason for it?
No idea.
Okay.
No idea.
That's strange. That's very strange. Anyways. Yeah, so funny story. I got invited to the advanced screening of the movie on the day of the screening that it was happening. And I was able to make it, which was fantastic. It was completely sold out, or full at capacity. And I was a little bit wary because, you know, it's the feature directorial debut from the daughter of a very established filmmaker who's had his ups and downs in the film industry. And a lot of people have called this a project of nepotism before even the film was screened. But as soon as the 90s New Line Cinema logo came on the screen, which rules, with the original theme as well, I was like, okay, this is going to be great. And for the most part, it was. I actually quite enjoyed the movie. I don't think it's amazing, but I do think it's got a terrific atmosphere, fantastic visual language, and unique style. I think Dakota Johnson, my goodness. Dakota Fanning gives the best performance she has given since starring in Man on Fire with Denzel. She's absolutely phenomenal in this movie. I also like the supporting players as well. Their characters are a little bit underdeveloped, but they were pretty good too. It's pretty scary. I wouldn't say it's the scariest movie out there, but it's fairly scary. And I was into it for the most part And then the ending arrived, and that's where things started to derail for me, but not as much as I would say the first two halves of the film were pretty engrossing and quite enjoyable. And I came out of the movie going, you know what? Her career is very promising. And I think if she tries not to stay in the shadow of her father, which she's, which in the ending of the film seems like she was trying to do, I think if she just wants to be a singular talent, uh, I think she's got a very promising future in filmmaking. But she has to be a little bit more confident, I guess, than trying to be M Night Shyamalan 2.0, because only M Night Shyamalan can do M Night Shyamalan.
Fair. Jack, what are your thoughts? Do you agree?
God, I was so hoping you would go next.
I can if you want, but
No, I'll start because this is a really multifaceted approach to go to this film because, like Max said, this is a debut film, so that needs to come into question. It's also from the child of a very prominent filmmaker who's had moments up and down. I'm a major fan. I have been since Unbreakable of this person's father, so that has to come into question. And also, I don't know about you two. Like we said this before we started. This has got a different name in the UK. This is called The Watched. The trailers are incredibly misleading in the UK. I don't know if that's international. I will have to double check after the recording. But this shows nothing of the overall plot. It's very much 3-4 people in this bunker, and then there's like noises, and there's very very little shown. So it to me it reminded me of Glass, where there's this idea of it's projecting an image for a mass audience, and then going to watch this film, it's going to be a very different approach. And I sort of it very much was that in this case. So I have to sort of break this down. So first, as a debut, I know this is an opening thought, so I'll try to keep this brief. As a debut, I think it's competent. I think it's fine as a debut. It goes for a major big hitters, and it does. I don't think it succeeds at all. But for a debut, I think it's absolutely fine. Moving on from that, looking as an actual film, there's a lot of risks taken here, and there's a lot of very strange type of thematic and narrative and pacing and very much the storytelling here is a very strange approach. Now, I find this filmmaker has absorbed and inherited quite a lot from her father, a lot of it interesting and a lot of it the poor side. Now, there's like M. Night Shyamalan who did Unbreakable, Sixth Sense before The Happening, and then there's a filmmaker after The Happening, and then there's a filmmaker after Split. This to me feels like Lady in the Water type of Shyamalan, where it's trying to go for PG-13, and this one is a little bit darker for the 2/3 of it, and then just goes for something so off kilter, almost killed the experience for me. I agree with Max. I think Dakota Fanning's excellent here. It's really nice to see her back in the mainstream as well, headlining something, because she's done Equalizer 3, which is like, yeah. She's done bits and pieces, and her younger sister Ellie sort of taking the mantle there. But she's a really accomplished actress. I think here she showcases some really good skill. I like the Irish setting. I think it's strange. I like the folklore approach, like the Ben Wheatley stuff. I feel in England and so on and so forth. I just think it doesn't really all come together in its end, and I think there's 2/3 of this which is quite promising, and then to not beat around the bush, I think personally this nosedives to a point where it suffocates itself, and it's just it becomes something very very strange, very misleading, and for me like quite like a thematic dissonance to what this approach is. I'll move on to you, Carson, because I think you hate this even more than I do. Not to give that away, but I genuinely really struggled with it with the last quarter of this to a point where. Oh, I don't know if this wasn't. If I don't want to get to a nepotism debate, because I don't think it's fair to analyze this film as itself. But I feel like if this wasn't the name attached to it, I really don't think this would have got a cinematic release. I think it would probably have gone to streaming or VOD, which is nothing wrong with it at all. I just think the approach is for a cinematic release, he doesn't really engage with that. But I'm interested to hear what you both go into detail about that later on. But Carson, I'm very interested to hear what you're going to say here.
Look, there's a reason we're doing this on the podcast. I was so excited for this movie just off concept alone. Obviously, Shyamalan stan. If you've been listening to the Clapper podcast, Jack, we've covered a lot of his films. We've defended some of his films that maybe we're kind of the big fans on and no one else is. I am one of the only 4 people in the world to watch all 4 seasons of Servant on Apple TV Plus, which started very M. Night Shyamalan, and then that's where Ishana really got her like directing start, and that's a lot of Ishana there in the later seasons. I was really excited and hopeful and wanting to love this, and I'm also very delusional when I want to love something, so like I was definitely here being like, I'm going to be the one to give this 4 stars. And I didn't like it. Definitely the positives that you mentioned are there. I think the visuals are fantastic. The setting is great. The score, I think, is really, really beautiful. I think this has a really underrated score that I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about. When it comes to story, when it comes to thematics, when it comes to focus, tone, this movie just feels like it has zero identity or clue of what it wants to be. It feels like it has a lot of ideas of like, this would be a cool concept for a scene, or this would be a cool concept for this or that. Kind of beating around the bush here and just spoiler free section, but like it has no idea actually how to craft a narrative to make that all work and feel satisfying. It was interesting, but ultimately I thought hollow in the first 2/3. I think the visual effects are also just bad, which is really tragic for this film because it does rely on visual effects at certain key points. But then you get to that final third, and we'll get into it. But like completely, I was probably at like a 2.5 or a 3-star on Letterboxd for the film. That finale hits, and it just like it is awful. Like it truly is, just has no idea what it wants to be, and it becomes so unsatisfying in every type of way. It's unsatisfying for the narrative of these characters. It's unsatisfying thematically with what this film then is like. Actually, it's all about this thematically, and it just is not built. It's not there. I really did not like the film. I really am sad that for me, and I agree with you, Jack, I was sitting there feeling like I was watching like one of those bad Shudder originals that come out around this time of year every year. It didn't feel like I was watching some grand film, and I don't know, just especially as a writer, maybe this is one of those cases where like she needs to work a lot on directing right now, and that should be her focus, not writing, because here it was a lot of ideas, but I just did not see the pathway or map through this.
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
I just say something?
yeah, of course, yeah.
It's interesting you talk about how bad the ending is, and I agree. But like at my screening, it was full of, I guess, influencers. I don't know, but like when the twists were starting to happen, you could actually hear the collective gasps from people going, "Oh my god!" I'm like, really? Like, people are really into this? Okay.
To be fair, I was in my theater also saying, "Oh my god," but not in that way. I was more shocked at what I was seeing, but I wouldn't say necessarily thrilled by it.
I don't think there was anyone in my theatre but me. So, look, I'll be very brief here. This is a feature by its own genre, is a payoff film. It is building and building and building to a twist, to a payoff, and ultimately that came to define her father after The Sixth Sense, partly consciously, partly subconsciously, but it ultimately came to define him in his latter work, that he became known as a twist guy. But this is a type of genre, regardless of the namesake, is that it builds and builds to something, to a release. Now, the issue here is it's catch-22, because if she went for the approach and didn't show anything, which I think would be far more beneficial to this film and have the imagination, keep the budget more down, don't allow it to showcase shoddy CGI, but let the momentum and the atmosphere work for the screenplay, it would intensify the experience. However, with that, for an average audience, they're not going to sit for an hour and 40 minutes to not see a payoff, to not see something. And I think it has to ultimately play its cards, and the cards it's dealt are not particularly very good. So for me, it doesn't work for those 2/3 purely on a genre level. It is. I agree with Max earlier. I do think there's a slight iconography here. I do think there's an understanding of production design and set. I do like the setting. I do like that it's claustrophobic. It's very strange. Yes, it can be often cheap, but I think it works with the material at hand. That's where it works. Not showing a lot works just purely on the imagination on itself. That the fact that the trailers were so sort of engaging and interesting was the fact that you don't see anything. That there's obviously like implications and stuff, but that identity that it has to come up with towards its climax, especially its third act, the weight of that and the film that you've seen before it, they don't match whatsoever. And it's interesting that we talk about this nepotism thing, because granted I didn't want to talk about it earlier, but I think it should be mentioned. This is actually self-financed by her father. This is completely paid for and then sold for $30 million, which I actually think is genius, because I think it takes, because the budget's been paid back anyway. So there's not like this idea of like, because what we're seeing in cinema recently, the budget's like, it's not going to make its money back, like Furiosa, Kingdom Planet of the Apes, the Mission Impossible stuff. These big budget things are not making any money at the moment. So I think it's really good to take that off her shoulders here and just let it play. It will find an audience. It'll find a cult audience in 10 years, I'm sure, like most of her father's stuff did. But at the moment in time, they're very much like you said, Carson. There's a difference between a writer here and a director. Now, I haven't seen The Servant. It's called The Servant, isn't it?
Just Servant.
Oh, just Servant. So I know you spoke about it, because we talked about Shyamalan, like you said beforehand, quite a lot in detail. And you've mentioned it multiple times about watching the first season and seeing bits and bats as it goes on. There probably is an idea of iconography and screen presence and more sort of a personality and style. I didn't really see that here, which is interesting, because for a debut, usually it's either full force or it's just very much lackluster. And to have a calling card as your first thing, that's probably the most disappointing aspect. It's what do you take away from this for Ishana's personality? What do you see as a director here? Where do you see texture? Where do you see personality? And really, aside from definitely understanding how to write like Trauma with Dakota Fanning, there's not really much here in understanding genre, suspense. There's not really any thrills. The tone's very heavy-handed. Then it goes like wild into something completely different. So I don't know. I come away from this like not really finding the identity that you said, but I don't know. I don't, if Max, you found an identity more so than us two. I just don't see here where I'm like, that's Ishana. Because when you look at debuts, I think they do scream. They just scream trying to get everything on screen, like if it's Mad Max or whatever it is, like Reservoir Dogs. Um, even like the Walter Hill stuff. When you go back into the 70s and you see a director trying to formulate his feet, you definitely still see it where the little breadcrumbs are where she wants to go to this. And to me, it just felt like a second run imitation of something that a father would do, which I think I don't really want to be pessimistic. I don't want to be negative, but ultimately with what I've seen here, it doesn't. Oh God, it's horrible to say it, but I don't find any entertainment. I don't find any engagement of where this career could go forward. In the fact of, are we just gonna have another rerun? Are we going to do a comedy next? I don't know. I feel I'm probably more sort of like taken back of really wanting to like this, of what from the limited material I saw, but the whole end product to me, it just doesn't land very well at all.
I think there are bits and pieces. I think especially in the first probably half of the film, I'd say, I think there is like bits and pieces here where I think it does show an assured like voice and style and identity. I do see that in like how she portrays the forest and how she portrays specifically the isolation. There's little bits here like I really like when they put the camera outside. Like there's some visuals like that I really appreciate. I think Ishana is there, but like then they have weird moments. Like there's a scene where characters get on a bus, and I guess we can kind of start to get into spoilers. But like there's a weird comedy to that scene that is just like out of left field, and there's little bits here and there where it feels like she's trying to have a quirk or have an identity, but it doesn't quite click. I don't know, but I do feel like in that first half there are bits and pieces here where like I think it does have a voice and it does have an identity that's present. I think it all starts to go downhill really when she like goes down into the hole, right? And then from that point on, I feel like it starts to lose itself. But up to that point, I kind of disagree with you.
By your own admission, though, and not to start World War III here, by your own admission, that these are narrative things here, aren't they? Like these are narrative things. So when she goes down into the hole, or when there's a narrative development, It's how does it hold its own weight there.
Oh, sure.
So,
Yeah.
so I sort of I agree with your point about maybe that she's got like this identity in terms of tone, which we can argue again for and against with the Shyamalan family for hours to come. But I just think on a visual level, I don't see anything as a calling card. And what we spoke about with Kingdom, with Wes Ball, with Max, I think cinema is becoming a visual identity now to a point where people want to see biggest things, the newest things, the latest things, rather than the narrative storytelling. That, from my opinion, granted the box office wouldn't state otherwise. I just think prices go up. People want to be entertained to a more visualization. They want to be taken on a journey. So when I look at this and I see like it starts as a character study, then it wants to have a personality of iconography, then it loses that and goes into narrative, then it goes into quirk, then it goes into genre. Like there's all these like it's like a massive like heartbeat. It's like do 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 do. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. And to me, I just don't find a consistent rhythm. But that debuts can always be quite awkward because you're still formulating thematic, you're still formulating emotive discourse, like But working on TV, with production very very tight and working on hour slots, that surprises me of how this feels different. So I will have to go watch Servant after this, or maybe watch a few episodes of hers, and just see how she does. Because to me, this feels like nobody's touched a camera beforehand. This feels like someone just comes in and maybe done some first AD work, which I know she did on Old, as we spoke about that on the podcast at the time. But I just don't see an identity here.
Maybe getting into spoilers, we can talk about more about that third act and kind of like maybe first let's discuss the review. I guess again, spoiler warning from this point on. How did you guys find the first initial twist, just the reveal of what's happening in the forest, and then we'll get into what happens when they leave the forest? But were you satisfied with the introduction of mythology, the fairies? How did you guys feel about that?
I think that's the most interesting part of the movie, delving deep into Irish folklore, because it's set in Ireland too.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this willingness to do that, and then it's then it really kind of falls apart once they get out,
Right.
and then they leave by a boat. And I think the stupidest line out of the whole thing was when I forget the guy's name, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's getting fucking decimated by the Watchers. Like he's literally just getting killed, right? And Ishana sort of lingers on him getting fucking killed, and then Georgina Campbell's character goes, "Daniel, run! How in the fuck can you run?" That was really really bad, and that was like the moment where I actually laughed very 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 loudly in the cinema, going, "Okay, no, this is bad." And the way it was shot too, because I really like the careful use of the color yellow inside
Yes.
that the
Yep.
bunker type house. I thought it was very 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 nice. I love the close-ups also of Dakota Fanning's eyes as she's crying, right? When she briefly cuts to when she expands upon that flashback of her mother dying, that was kind of stupid. But when she briefly cuts to like very small scenes of that flashback, I thought that was effective and it was emotionally powerful, and we knew everything about that. We didn't need to know more about it, but I thought that was really good. But then once we get out of the forest and we get to the boat, it started as if it was shot like a sci-fi movie, like a sci-fi original type of movie. Like it felt like a completely different visual language and just a completely different atmosphere. It felt like a complete 180. And then that whole stupid ending of oh well, the Madeline is the Watcher. She's been a Watcher all along, and changed forms and starts killing people or attacking Amina. I thought it was just dumb. I kind of checked out there because I felt like it ended at a point where it had one small twist that was okay, right? Because it would reveal more of the origins of the Watchers and the professor's research, and then once they get on the bus, I felt the movie should have just ended there, but then it just kept going, and that's where it just kind of tarnished its momentum with this horrendous climax. Just
Well, that's where it feels like it ends. I was really like, oh, we're at the end of the movie. They've escaped the forest. It was kind of a weird ending with the Daniel bit, but like, okay, that's fine. And then it just keeps going for another 30 minutes. It's strange because they introduce obviously like the Watchers and the fairies, and they introduced like they can mimic people, and that's a whole plot. And then immediately you're like, oh, one of them is a Watcher. That seems like a natural twist. And then you're like, oh, I guess they're not. Okay, that's fine. And then you have this extended sequence of her going to do the research, and they hammer in. And this movie is very tell instead of show. I think that's one of the biggest issues with it as far as just being engaged by it. But they hammer in like there's these half breeds, and we don't know what happened to them. And it was like, okay. And then you get that whole sequence at the end, and they try to make it this huge reveal, even though like the rules that we've established for the Watchers do not apply to Madeline or whatever. So like, or whoever, I don't, is that the old woman's name?
Yeah.
Madeline. Okay. So they establish like the rules do not apply to her, and they've hammered in like very explicitly there's half breed. So we spend this entire extended sequence, and then they want that ending to reveal to be like, oh my god, she's a half breed, isn't that crazy? And it's just like it really becomes comedic. I was laughing throughout the entire. Thank God there was no one else in the theater because this movie's doing bad financially. Because I was sitting there literally audibly laughing at how bad it got in that end. I mean, it really is like shocking, I think, how poor the screenplay is, how poor just the ideas are. And then like to tie in number one, like logically nothing in this movie makes sense. Not to be like, oh, it all has to make logic. After being trapped in a forest for what, 8 months it was, more than that, because they spent, it seems like months in the forest. They all just go back to their homes and it's all fine, and like no one's noticed or nothing's ever happened. It's just like casual. But like it just is so dumb. It's a very dumb film at the end. But I agree with Max. I really like the initial injection of mythology. I'm a big fan of that in movies. I think some people might feel a little underwhelmed by that, but I think it worked overall as far as I like building that world out, and using specifically Irish mythology in this movie set in Ireland. But it just got really dumb really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with either opinion. To put it very bluntly, this just can't suffice under its own weight. Like it's when it's intimate with Dakota Fanning, and you get the small inclinations of plot, and you get a few twists, like you said, the first initial one about the folklore. I think that's fine. I think it's like, oh, okay, like it's a little bit more of a subverted take on the fairy tale. Like I like that Irish folklore. You know, like it's like the Wicker Man. We've had it with the British stuff, with Ennis Man, with Mark Jenkins stuff, which I wasn't a big fan of, but I appreciate the sort of going back to the 1970s sentiments. I was like, oh, like she's going for the the folklore 70s stuff, like a father tried to do with the 60s, with in science fiction with the happening and stuff. Like, oh, like cool, like someone who loves John and wants to do a little twist on it. No foul, no problem at all. But it is that secondary jump where it's like, what are we doing now? Why are we on a bus? Why are we why are we going to investigate journalism? Why are we investigating any deeper than we want to be? The tone changes completely, and you're probably right about the boat shift, where I think a director struggles with the jump of genre, in that it's been very quiet, very subdued, and then we need a jump. And I don't think she's at that point where she can. And this is not like this primarily a debut thing as well. Is that the experience to go from one thing to another and let it flow very well. I think as a writer and a director, that comes into question with that sequence with that, and it's just like a really awkward type of death as well. Like there's breadcrumbs about like him losing the plot and stuff, but I was like, I don't know about that. I feel like all of them at that point it's like beginning to crack, so it felt very underwhelming. But my sort of idea was like, oh, like maybe they're going to go for the descent then. Maybe she'll go for the like she'll subvert the expectation of like using the term fairies and going for like the iconography of that being very subdued and very childlike, and she'll twist that, and it'll be very much practical effects, a little bit of gore, but mostly horrifying. Like just go for the iconography, and it just felt so flat on its ass when it tries to make out like this woman is one, and then there's like a relationship. You're trying to deepen the mythology, but no one's really there for that. That should all be secondary. We should focus on the central character. It shows a bit too much about that as well. Showing, not telling. It's like, I don't know. I don't think the balance is very good there either. But the whole mythology where she doubles down on it, and then there's like secondary twist where this person's now following her. I don't know. To me, it just feels like added on excessive mumbling storytelling where someone can't understand. And again, it comes from that beautiful naivety of a debut filmmaker of like, just call it quits, stop it, put the full stop, cut to black. And this is too long, an hour and 40 minutes. This should be 90 at a maximum. It should be 85 minutes. It does not need to be this long. But I do think it's the naivety of a filmmaker going to this like, oh, maybe I should have added a bit more here. Maybe I should add, not knowing when to stop. And the twists and the turns, it's like like she had a relationship. Then there's like the mythology about the half-breed, like you said yourself, Carson. But this person was like frowned upon. I'm like, oh, okay, like I don't care about this person. Then everyone's back at the house, like you said, and like there's no questions. The one thing that I noticed very early on, because going into this sort of stuff with the preconceived the preconceived idea of twists, is that she purposely doesn't show her boss's face at the beginning. It's like blurred in the background, and I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting, because that to me feels a purposeful tack of not wanting to show the face. And then throughout, we're going through Ireland, she drives out, we don't see anyone else. We know she's got some trauma, and then we get to just see 4 people in the flesh, and we don't get, and then we don't get to see these watchers themselves. Like there's something that we're pushing away this idea of showcasing face. I thought that was a really interesting idea, and it's just basically just like a secondary thing where it's like purely coincidental, and I was like, it's just very frustrating to see little small snippets here of what could have been, where the direction was going to go, and ultimately it falls very much like you said, like a Shudder original. And to me, it is worse than Lady in the Water, in the fact that at least with that type of film, it isn't trying to be something it's not. If that's strange, this one is trying to be this PG-13 thriller on a budget, and just can't survive with its own weight. But the fairy stuff with the mythology, again, the iconography is poor, the screen presence of it's poor, the execution of it's very poor. So you've waited all this time, an hour and 35 minutes, to get to the crux of it, and the reveal is this such substandard, underwhelming experience. It just bottoms out, and I do think for a majority of the audience who go see this, leaving with that is going to be such a destructive feeling. I just think that will overpower everything that's come before it, which is so unfortunate, because there is something here. It's just that last 20 minutes you could go from the bus, you could go from the bunker, like you said, Carson. We're cutting back even further to its initial running time here. We're going from 10 minutes out, 20 minutes out, then 45 minutes out. So where these problems lie, it probably isn't just a third act thing. I think it most definitely is like this rhyming of the narrative, where it just, I don't know. I don't really know what the idea was here. I don't really know what the execution was. Who's this aiming for? Where's the audience? I don't think anyone's asking for this. Granted, that's not a problem, but I just get to it and I'm thinking, who sells this? Who are you selling it to? Who's going to sit there and go, that was amazing? Like, what she did with the mythology. I just don't think there's anyone there for that. But anyway, there's a few people who like this, predominantly not. But yeah, I just don't think it suffices with its twists whatsoever.
Well, shout out Max and everyone who does like it. But I mean, I think the issue is like there's so many small bits here that could be something. They introduce the pet store, and then at first it seems like it's going to be possibly a commentary on like humans' relationships to animals and putting them on display or whatever. That doesn't go anywhere. It's so rich, this idea of cloning people and identity, especially in the time of like social media and projecting. And like you could go somewhere with that. They never go somewhere with that. And then at the end, they try to turn this into a whole narrative about like hating yourself and living with that and trauma, which they have sprinkled throughout, but it doesn't feel satisfying to like 90% of the film. It just continually, it has little bits here where I'm like, oh, okay, now I get what this film is going to do, and it's going to be something worthwhile. Because I think the plot's fine until you get to that third act. But ultimately, I think you want it to either take two routes, where it's going to be the simplistic survival thriller and you walk away and you're like, oh, that's a really fun like film. That's a really fun horror movie. Or you want it to be meaningful and thematically rich in some way, and it just isn't. So for me, I walk away and kind of getting into the final thoughts, maybe like, I agree with you, Jack. I'm not really sure what anyone would go to this film and have fun with. outside of thinking the iconography and setup is interesting and some of that visual language, which I think is there. And again, I think the score is good. I think there are good parts here,
Definitely,
a
yeah.
good core. But it's just like when you look at what is actually being delivered, yes, the chicken is cooked really nicely on this plate, but like the actual meal's a mess, and I just don't know what you would get from it. So I'm very, I guess, not a fan, sadly.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ishana.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, just to throw it back to you two as well, to ask you a question then, to try to answer that very briefly. I granted it's not making very much money, but it comes from an original IP. It comes from a namesake that, granted, it off the back of Shyamalan, but it's Ishana's stuff, so it doesn't have a preconceived audience. Dakota Fanning hasn't been in the limelight for a vast amount of time, so it has that against it. My question to you two then is that who is this actually aimed at? Because whoever's selling this is on the idea of trying to sell it to the PG-13 crowd, which for horror fans to take your kids on a weekend is a gold mine of a target audience. If it's nailed right, it has to be edgy but not too grotesque in order to isolate those audience members. But when I see this, I think for at least for the half of it, you'll get those kids on side and you'll get the adults on side. But then when it crosses the line, the two-third way, I think you lose the kids. I think you lose your adults. So at the end of the day, I can't see who this is, who comes away from this, like who's going to take people, especially when you've got, like, granted you got Bad Boys 2, but the amount of re-releases in the cinema now, like Prisoner of Azkaban, I think Goblet of Fire is playing at the same time at my theatre. Those people, this is going to be a bit of a shot here, but those two audiences are not dissimilar. The PG-13, granted, Harry Potter's got a massive IP backlog, but the genre, the tone, they're not too far off of not being edgy, but being a little bit out there to test the waters. People should be flocking to watch this and watching something new, but they would rather watch something that came out 20 years ago almost at this point. So I don't know. I sort of worry about this a lot, but I just generally wonder who's going to see this, who's coming away from this like thinking, oh, this is going to be decent. Because I don't think children or adults find a collective mass here. I just think I don't know who. I know I'm like rambling, but I just don't know who goes to see this. Who walks into this and goes, oh, this is amazing. I just don't know, if you weren't a film fan, where this connects with you. Who is it selling to? What's its age range? What's its target audience? There's so many questions to be answered, and even after the film, to me, it's still a little bit blurry on where the idea of, right, we can sell to these people, we can sell to this. Because, very briefly, when a father releases the film with Josh Hartnett, you know who that's for. You know the target audience. It's done and it's But with this, I just find it very much a tonal thematic dissonance, and I think that's a primary reason why people haven't got bums in seats. And the fall off to this will be God, but this will not show next week in where I live. I guarantee it just won't show anywhere. If a Furiosa was drop off, this is going to be barbaric.
Taking a break from the episode, I want to tell you guys about a great sponsor we have for today's episode, and that is Zencastr. Now look, we've been recording podcasts for a long time here on ClapperCast, and in that time we have used multiple platforms to record and edit our episodes, but since going to Zencastr, we haven't looked back. Zencastr is an incredibly easy and free to use platform where you can record both audio and visual for your podcast. No more downloading apps or struggling to connect with guests. Instead, you can share a link to literally anyone and have them join through their browser for an episode to make your podcast streams a reality. Not only can you record with studio quality visual and audio, but you can also edit in a breeze. We love using Zencastr, and if you want to use Zencastr yourself, let me tell you about a pretty good deal. While yes, you can use Zencastr for free, there are also some great tools with a paid plan. If you want to go ahead and get yourself a paid plan to make your podcast dreams a reality, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code ClapperCast, and you will get 30% off your first month of any Zencast paid plan. Again, let me tell you, I have been through the market. I have seen the different sites. I've seen the different apps. I've seen what everyone is using, and nobody is doing it like Zencastr. We love you here on the podcast, Zencastr. We wouldn't be what we are without you, and we would love to see all of our listeners go use Zencastr. Remember, code ClapperCast at zencastr.com/pricing to get 30% off your first month of any Zencast paid plan. With that, let's go back to the episode.
I mean, it'll be a very big learning curve. I don't see this stopping, Ashan. I think that there's a lot to look. The positive, not to the final thoughts here, but I'm gonna say something else. But I think positively, there's a lot to take away from this as an audience and as a filmmaker. And I don't think she should look at this and feel. If the one thing I can say about a father, don't know him, but the one thing I can gravitate is that the man's had a lot of knockbacks and always got back up. And I think this is a bad time to have it as your first debut. But if it's ever going to happen, it's probably good to have it. It's probably to trip up at the start of your race and not at the end. So I probably would best leave it at that without trying to go back in and annihilate it again.
I'll also say that I think, again, I mean, as I kind of earlier mentioned, I think the directing here is fine. I think directing is good. I think if she really hones in on that and maybe stops trying to be a writer, when clearly I think just judging by this film, that's not the strong suit, I don't have an issue. I think that's a great path. I think it'll work fine. I think the issue is that it seems like she cannot construct a movie. Maybe that's an editing partly, you know, there's a lot of factors, but like, I just think her strong suit is not writing, which is fine. You don't have to write your own film. So,
yeah. I also feel that that's a sentiment that a lot of first-time directors feel the need to do. I think a lot of directors don't want to take on other people's work because they want that calling card of, this is my debut, this is what I can do. And granted, I don't think anyone wants to go in for a job thinking, oh, I'm going to work for everyone else in my life. I think you want to feel like you're your own person. But I agree with you. I don't think it's a necessity to have the idea of being a writer director. You know, just go out there and do stuff. You know, just be a director, hone your craft, and if you want to do your own stuff, that's fair enough. But they're going to have to be a limitation with expectation. But I agree with you. I think I just hope it's not this feeling of like, oh, my father, my dad's a writer director. I think that's what I want to do. I think it's very dangerous category to get into that sort of conversation. You know, trying to emulate a very different type of well, not a very different type of film, but a far more prominent, successful type of filmmaker who's had those setbacks. You know, I don't know. Would you, if you were going to be a first time filmmaker, would you not want to write your own stuff though?
I mean, if I was a first time director, I'd probably write my own screenplay and do whatever the fuck I wanted. So
yeah.
And I wouldn't also care what critics.
Yeah,
critics
no.
say.
I don't think you should. I
think it's interesting though because you know Shyamalan also, like you said, had a lot of setbacks in his career, but he seems to be in a good place now. I don't know. I've not seen Trap. I'm very much looking forward to it. But
yeah, I think we all are here.
I think
we'll be here there.
I think it's interesting to see him bounce back. I mean, because the Last Airbender and After Earth were unwatchable.
Yeah, that was a very bad period for a filmmaker. That I genuinely felt even with the Visit, I just didn't think he was going to be able to escape that, and I think he's so lucky with Split that he goes back to the well. Not to spoil that film for anyone else. Not that there's another sequel afterwards, but you know he played the game very well there to play the Blumhouse idea. He sold the film already. This is what I don't think a lot of people know this, but he sold Old and Split to those studios. So he self-financed. So he's a very understandable filmmaker.
I mean,
the risks.
he put everything on the line for these movies to work, and they did.
Yeah.
So it's good for him. And now now he's back on top.
I do have to say, not to get negative here, but I know you mentioned about ignoring the reviews. If I was just not going to do this podcast and have the idea of watch this if I want to, after reading the reviews from two of my like friends on Letterboxd, I would have stayed clear so much of this. There's two type of reviews here. There's one that it's a 1-star. So there's a piece of absolute garbage, which I think is very unfair. I don't think that's Jacob Fletch for everyone out there. Like, he hates this film. But I've read about 3 or 4 reviews that have mentioned this word nepotism here, and a few like people I know quite well. And I think that's a really unfair thing. I know we'll always have this conversation. I know I've said I don't want to talk about it, but I do think it's important to have, because she she comes from a filmmaker's background. Her father is a filmmaker. She'll be absolutely enamored with filmmaking. She's not going to go to be a cook. She's going to be a filmmaker. She's, her other sister's a pop star. They're an artistic background. It's hard to sort of tell someone at this stage, like, you can't be this, you can't be that. She's made the effort. It's been self-financed. That's another question entirely. But she's going to have to wrestle with those demons. And she has mentioned this in her press as well, which, again, I think is very unfair for a first-time filmmaker, when you've got other people who have, like Robert Rodriguez, who have like 9 goes at it now. Like that, you should not be making a Alita Battle Angel when you can't get your money back for Machete Kills, and whatever that Spy Kids atrocities are. But I just think that I think that there's still 1 or 2 films left for her to really showcase her stuff, and I think there's a lot of stuff that has been not sort of review bombed, but I do think there's a lot of people with an agenda to annihilate this film with preconceived conceptions of, well, it's from like M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, like it should be better than this. She's still a filmmaker, she's still a human being. She has her own identity, and she's still formulated as a filmmaker. So it would be very unfair to annihilate her on that front. But I just thought I'd mention that because some of the reviews are like, I mean, Jakob give it a 0.5 star. One of my friends, Rebecca, 1.5 star. Yassim, friend of the show, Clapper writer, 2 stars about the nepotism. There's a lot there where it's, Paul Price, Carson, I'm sure, 2 stars, but not so far off yours, Carson. There's a lot there to that people have really rejected this. So I do hope round 2 is more confident and just
To be clear, she's also incredibly young. Like, she's only
Yes.
24, 25 years old. Like,
Yeah.
that's very young for a director.
Hey, Orson Welles made Citizen Kane when he was
Oh,
25.
come on.
Okay.
Stop yourself. No, come on. That is a fair point. But I was watching Spy Kids and The Abyss inebriated at university when I was that age. I don't know what I was doing. So it's a really interesting. I mean, it's just the narrative is being taken over by this nepotism thing. We're not looking at that 24-year-old filmmaker. We're not looking at the self-financed. Who gives a shit if it doesn't make any money back? She's already sold it. The M. Night Shyamalan family are fine. They've sold it to Warner Brothers. It's absolutely fine, But there is this conversation happening now about this nepotism thing, and we're not looking at a 24-year-old filmmaker who with a debut. We're not looking at that anymore, which I think is a shame. But that's not to say the other conversation isn't valid. But I just think it's taken over a bit. But
I think if it's self-financed, I really don't get why anyone would care if it's nepotism. But that's my take.
I
think
I agree. If you're gonna run your own risks, then I don't think anyone has got the audacity to make a comment and say anything like that.
Especially someone like Shyamalan, who's like, again, as Max said, like risked, like he built that money, right? Like he earned that. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's remortgaged his house to make a visit. Split was a massive ordeal. Glass was another one that he self-financed that made his money back. Old, these are calculated risks that are not pretty calculated at the time. Where it's not the most lucrative of things. James Gray, Ad Astra, goes to Venice, gets the Academy Award nominations. Guy can't afford to live in London. It's not the most lucrative of businesses when it comes to the people who put the risks in. Not the risks in, sorry, but the more so the artistic risks. Whereas the people who make the money, they get it back on tax deals and all sorts of stuff, aren't they? So maybe that's a conversation for another day. But I agree with you, Cass. I think if you've made your own money, like Coppola, I don't think Coppola gives a rat's ass what critics think about him. Self-financed his own money, sold his own stuff. The big difference, I granted 120 million, and this is 30 million, but still, they're playing with their own money. I don't think it's any comment to have.
Well, I think that's going to do it for our conversation on The Watchers or The Watched. If this conversation inspired you to go watch it, good on you. You can find it in cinemas now. Let's get to our question of the week, because we are asking, we're like halfway through the year, just about almost exactly halfway through the year. So we're asking, what is your favorite film of the year so far? Jack, what's your favorite film?
I think this is going to be sort of an obvious one. I did struggle with this slightly. I'm going to have to try to find my list because there's not a lot on it. But I didn't want to choose the one you're going to choose just because I know that we're both going to go for it. I've seen a lot this year that I've sort of really liked. I'm going to do two, but I'm going to change one of them as well. Obviously objectively it's challenges, but I'll let you have that one because that's just it's not very fair to do that. There's two that really shocked me. First one, Girls State, which I know we reviewed Boy State. We both loved that. I watched it in France. I was like, oh, this is the same old stuff. And how it twists and goes for its own cause, I thought was brilliant. Really educational, really informative, very poignant, and quite profound. And because I watched its sister film a couple of days ago, which we'll get to in a minute. But I am going to have to say, I really enjoyed Immaculate. I just thought it was just superb. That horrible 70s, 80s horror. That was my surprise. But objectively, it is Challenges. Challenges, like, objectively superb. But those are my two tops for 2024. But not there yet, are we, really? Maybe there'll be another one, I don't know.
Hey, we have a new Paul Schrader film to come. We have some good stuff coming. We have some good stuff to come. Max, one of your favorite films of the year so far?
I mean, there can only be one. Madam Web. No, I'm kidding. Joking. No, this has been a pretty good year for more independent international fare than it has been for Hollywood. Now, granted, Inside Out 2 just made a fuck ton of money. That's great. Fantastic. No, my favorite film of the year so far is About Dry Grasses. By, I can't pronounce the guy's name. Sorry, Nuri Bilge Ceylan. I think that's how you do it. Just knocked my socks off. Didn't know what to expect when I watched it. It's 3 hours and 17 minutes long, and I mean, utterly captivating. Contains one of the most incredible fourth wall breaks I've seen in any movie ever. And the lead performance, again, I'm not even going to try to pronounce the actor's name, but just incredible. I feel like this is a 2024 2023 film. It came out here in 2024, so I'll count it as such. But I also really liked, which I watched last week or 2 weeks ago. I went to see Dali by Quentin Dupieux, and that movie rules. It pisses its sole existence is to piss off as many people as possible, and for that I I loved it. Had a great time.
Yeah, so for me, I obviously it's Challengers. I think Challengers is like flawless. For a second there, it seemed like I Saw the TV Glow might break in that, but rewatching both films, Challengers is still my number one. I also want to throw out, it's not my favorite film of the year, and I count it personally as being a last year release. On Netflix, everyone should watch Good Grief. It came out the first week in January, thought it was going to be shit, and it's an absolutely fantastic film.
Great shout.
No one talked about it and no one saw it, but it's incredible. So would recommend, especially for Pride Month. What a great film for Pride Month, y'all.
That's a great shout.
Actually, much better than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I literally thought it was going to be trash, but it was really good. And Netflix screwed it out of every conversation with the release pattern. But that's fine.
Just
Netflix.
like every other movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
With that, let's get to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we want to talk about that we haven't mentioned on the podcast. Max, what have you seen recently?
Well, I watched a lot of garbage. Strangers Chapter 1, Atlas, Beach Boys, If, Furiosa, which I hated. Yes, but it hasn't been great. But recently I saw Bad Boys, Ride or Die. That was incredible. Just amazing piece of... I'm going to say it's a piece of action art. It's fantastic. The action sequences are insane. I do not believe for a second that Batgirl was quote unquote unreleasable or unwatchable or terrible, whatever, because the amount of energy that the two directors, Adil and Bilal, bring to this movie. I'm sure they brought it and they knocked it out of the park with Bad Girl, but we'll never see it, which is a real shame. I also finally watched The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare by Guy Ritchie. Phenomenal. I adore Guy Ritchie, and I love his style. I love the way he shoots action. I think Henry Cavill gives the best performance of his career. He is so good in this movie. I also rewatched the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy in preparation for the new movie that's coming out, which I'm very much looking forward to. Tony Scott's Beverly Hills Cop 2 is the best out of the bunch. And I saw Inside Out 2 in theaters, which was honestly very, very disappointing. I'm not going to lie. I was very disappointed and very underwhelmed. It looked great, but I don't know. Have I grown out of Pixar, or have their movies just become really boring now? Maybe both. But I was I was very disappointed by this movie.
Jack, what have you seen recently?
Well, we had a 2 week break, didn't we? And I'd only watched 2 films in the last podcast. I watched Psycho 2 and Fall Guy. So this last 2 weeks I've tried to make it up for you. So I've seen a lot. There's going to be a theme here, so keep it going. But I watched Mind Ripper, the unofficial Hills of Ice 3 film. Very similar to like the Watchers or the Watching, in the 2/3 of it are like quite interesting, kind of weirdly similar genre films in that we're in a place, isolation. There's a third party issue going on, a monster, let's say, and it just sort of loses the plot, has no idea what to do. But I thought I needed to see it. I watched some Romero. I watched The Crazy, the original. That was outstanding. I love that really early 70s horror where no title cards, just drops us into the absolute shit, and watching like Middle America just being ravaged. And I quite like the Timmy Oliphant remake as well. I have a soft spot for that, but that was exceptional. Sort of loses the plot literally with its final act, but really quite scary stuff. Romero's 70s work is sort of like really, really comparable to like Coppola's Highbrow, if this is considered lowbrow. Frightening. I finished my Psycho saga, watched the third one and the fourth one. Really poor compared to the second one. The second one's a really good film about the adverse effects of the culture around Norman Bates. These two just carry on as if that hadn't happened and just go on the same cycle. Very, very poor. Psycho 3 was fine, but 4 was... There's some choices there. Some choices. I watched Rob Zombie's 31. Like Shyamalan, I'm a Rob Zombie stan. I'll die for that man on that hill. You know, I quite like his horror work. I like that Midwest carny approach of America. It frightens me to death, but I always get a really thrilling experience of it. And I hadn't reviewed 31. I think I just logged it. Really good, that opening with I can never remember his name. I don't think is it Richard Blake, because he's in a new film. Richard Brake. God, that guy could play the Joker. Like, he has such screen presence, like a face that has an iconographer. Like, why he's not in more films, it genuinely really shocks me. But 31 had loads of good fun with that. Crazy stuff. Boy Kills World, I watched, reviewed for the site. Fine. Good stuff. Underuses everything. I watched Founders Day. Very poor until its final twist, where it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's a subverted take about what is a villain, and you know, it's been done before, but it was just interesting to watch. But go watch Thanksgiving, Ela Ross film. Like, what a surprise that was last year. It was really good fun. Similar, but just not as good. Watch Pink Cadillac, Eastwood. Watch True Crime with Clint Eastwood. Watch Absolute Power with Clint Eastwood. Go watch Pink Cadillac. True Crime was okay. Absolute Power was okay. Like what Max did with prep for Beverly Hills, I watched the Crow sequel. I don't know what the Weinsteins are on doing shit like that. I can't believe sometimes they have absolutely no idea what to do with movies, and that's a prime example with its original from the Brandon Lee film. I watched Joe Carnahan's Narc, which has got an Arrow video release in the UK. What a fucking great debut that is, and that's a film that Tom Cruise tried to get him on board to direct Mission Impossible 3. What we could have had. Without that, we wouldn't have had fucking Star Wars with J.J. Abrams. So What an absolute colossal disappointment that is. But go watch that. Gritty, nasty, very pulpy procedural cop thriller with Ray Liotta, the late great Ray Liotta, which is sad to even have to say, puts a really good performance in. I'm getting down to the regs here. I did a back-to-back screening of The First Omen and The Nun 2, wanting to like The Nun 2. I thought The First Omen was very good as a psychological thriller, but it just played a little bit too much into convention to me narratively. Whereas I thought The Nun 2 was absolutely horrid. For someone who is like an apologist for the Robin Hardy first film, because I love that iconography, that Hammer horror production style. This was like a film, a sort of psychological thriller across Paris or across France, anyway, even in Europe to that degree, without a villain. None of it was scary. The production was terrible. The filmmaking quality is incredibly poor for the genre. Very, 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 very like underwhelming. Speaking of absolute shite, I might have to bleep that. I do apologise. I watched Sam Taylor Johnson's Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. Now I don't know if that's because I'm British, and when I was growing up, she was like in the paper all the time. When I get on the bus to school, she was in the paper, and obviously untimely death. But to do that film is absolutely abhorrent about her as a character. The way that it tries to project Amy Winehouse as being anti-establishment, and the fuckers make a contrived conventional biopic out of her, I think is like one of the most backhanded, nasty things you can do to someone's legacy. Go watch the Azif Kapadia documentary where she says it herself. That was fucking appalling. Last but not least, I watched 2 Netflix movies. Under Paris. Move on. And I watched Richard Linklater's Hitman, and I find Richard Linklater's like middle ground stuff just like very uncompelling. It's a very sexy film. It has like this wonderful screen presence and charisma, but I just thought it was nothingness. Like most of his like Bernie. To me, I'm like, I'm not like repulsed by them. I just don't like the Apollo 10.5 that he did. To me, they're just like nothingness. Like, oh, okay, I just don't connect with them at all. But under Paris was like 2/3 of that was just, what are we doing here? What are we doing? Like, why would sassifying Jaws, mate? Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we doing memes about movies that are shit? I just thought it was very poor, and I like shark movies. I'll wait for that Something in the Water that comes out by Studio Canal the next month. But other than that, I mean, I was going to watch Bad Boys 4 like Max, but in case I watched this because I'm loyal. And Carson, I'm telling you now, I wish I would have watched Bad Boys 4. But yeah, but that's been what I've watched this week. I'm excited to watch Bad Boys 4.
Sorry, I inspire you to watch real cinema between this, and I made you watch The Hunger Games, which now we're getting a sequel for. So hey, we'll be back. I think in a couple years for that.
The poster is going up, and the badges are going on.
I'm just gonna focus. I'm just gonna focus on the new releases I saw this past couple weeks. Chris Pine's Poolman, off the recommendation of a friend of the podcast, Michael Fairbanks. Really surprised by how much I enjoyed this, because this does not seem like a Carson Timar movie. I know everyone at TIFF hated it, sad for them, but like I thought this was very fun. Better than Hitman, I'll be honest. I think Hitman was very average. I agree with you a lot there, Jack. As a romantic comedy, I think it's like fine, but I did not get much from that. I do not see how people are coming away from this being like 5 stars, but
it's hot.
It's fine. It's mildly hot. The phone scene is good, and everyone you talk to is like, "Oh, the phone scene is really good," and then they don't say anything else is really good because it's not.
You had to see it in the theater, Carson. You had to see it in the theater.
Sorry, I live in the country that put it on Netflix. It's not my fault, you know. It's not my fault. And Netflix could give it a theatrical release, but they chose not to. So, you know, whatever. Inside Out 2 did get a theatrical release, but I thought, again, similar to Max, very average, very there. I even have been a bigger fan of some recent Pixar films, but this one just did nothing for me. I think it's very simplistic compared to the first film. It is very redundant to the first film. Just did not do a lot for me. And then Under Paris, I also watched. And Jack, I'm sad to hear you say that because I like dumb shark movies and I had a lot of fun with this film.
Really?
I really thought it was super fun. Very dumb about it, a shark that comes into Paris, and then there's a lot of sharks in Paris. But I had fun with it. I thought this was super, like, way more entertaining and way more actually, like, genuinely. There's some craft here that I appreciate. When you look at shark films, a lot of them are just like instantly 1-star awful. I thought this had something to it where, like, I could rewatch this film. So sad to hear you say that, but valid.
Have you
if
seen
you wanna-
Furiosa yet?
No, but
Carson, you've had
I'm
2
going
weeks.
eventually.
You've had 2 weeks.
I was busy watching
Yeah,
The Watchers.
yeah, that's
I'm
it.
sorry that I am busy with a life.
Yeah,
seeing
well,
The Watchers.
fair enough. Yeah.
And I had to stay home to watch Hitman and Under Paris, so I was busy. But I will get to Furiosa, I'm sure, one day.
Carson.
This week, hopefully. With that, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining. Where can we find everyone on social media? Max?
Yeah, well, I've been putting my channel to die, I guess, not for a long time, because I've been busy with just insane amount of FYC interviews, and now that Emmy voting has begun, I will direct all of you to check them all out on awardsradar.com. I interviewed a lot of people. I'm going to name just a few. Kei Hui Kwan, probably the most popular name out of the list for Low-Key Season 2. I interviewed a bunch of people on Three Body Problem, which is a show that I absolutely love. I think it's fantastic. So go ahead and check that out. I interviewed Aaron Moten for Fallout. And then I'm blanking, but I interviewed not long ago people that were the Newton brothers, who composed X-Men 97, one of the directors and one of the stars as well. Just a bunch of people, so go ahead and check them all out on awardsradar.com. If not, you can go ahead and find me on social media at Max from Quebec, and at some point I'll start doing videos on my channel again, MFQ reviews, but I was just, slammed with work, school, interviews, movies, whatever. It's been fun. The grind doesn't stop.
No, it does not. Jack, where can you find you on social media?
You can find me on. I don't really tweet, but I like a lot of Max's stuff. To be fair, I do quite a lot. I like all the FYC stuff. I like the Masters of Air stuff you've been doing. But yeah, I've just been on Twitter, really just retweeting stuff and trying not to be absorbed by the algorithm. But you can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd, more importantly, with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp's my full name, and you can find me on Clapper, which finally released my Gus Van Sant Psycho feature about why that film's actually very important to the state of where modern filmmaking went, and the use of remaking and the idea of the auteur and the importance of the actor. Very, very interesting stuff. Anyone go out there and try read it if you can do, and hopefully I might be releasing some more stuff soon.
And you can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Again, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week as we discuss Kinds of Kindness. Nick will be back and it'll be a fun review, so we'll get there then. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.